A poor waitress saved a crying baby. What happened 10 years later is unreal, the shriek. It wasn't just a cry. It was a desperate, soul-wrenching wail that ripped through the morning air, tearing through the familiar symphony of clattering plates, sizzling bacon, and the low murmur of early risers at Pop's Diner. It was the kind of sound that made every head snap up, every conversation falter, every fork pause mid-air. Sarah, her arms laden with a precarious tower of steaming coffee mugs, felt it deep in her bones. A familiar pang of anxiety, a tightening in her chest. Another crying baby. But this one was different. This wasn't the usual fussiness. It was a raw, primal scream of pure distress. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that felt like a Monday's exhausted hangover, dragging its feet through the week. The fluorescent lights of Pop's Diner hummed with a tired resignation. A dull, yellowish glow that mirrored Sarah's own weariness. Her feet, encased in worn-out, non-slip shoes, ached with a constant deep throb that had become a permanent fixture in her anatomy after years of pounding the linoleum. Every step was a silent protest, a testament to the endless hours she spent on her feet. Her tips for the morning had been abysmal, a measly handful of crumpled bills and loose change, barely enough to cover the bus fare home, let alone put a dent in the towering mountain of bills waiting for her on her kitchen counter. Rent, utilities, a perpetually sick car that seemed to demand more money than it was worth. The list was endless, a relentless weight pressing down on her. She was 28, and the vibrant dreams she'd once harbored of art school, of a life beyond the smell of stale grease, burnt toast, and cheap coffee, felt like distant echoes from another lifetime, fading with each passing year. Poverty, she knew, was a relentless companion, a shadow that clung to her every step, whispering doubts in her ear. The baby's cry intensified, escalating from a wail to a guttural scream, a sound so piercing it seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the diner. It was coming from booth 7, tucked away in the farthest corner, usually reserved for the quietest, most inconspicuous customers. Today it was occupied by a young couple, their faces etched with a harrowing mixture of exhaustion, frustration, and what looked dangerously close to utter despair. The baby, no more than a few months old, was red-faced, thrashing violently in its car seat, strapped to the worn vinyl seat. Its tiny fists clenched and unclenched, its legs kicked wildly. The mother, her once neat hair disheveled and clinging to her damp forehead, was trying desperately to rock the car seat with one hand, her movements jerky and ineffective, while attempting to spoon a mouthful of lukewarm oatmeal into her own mouth with the other. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around the diner, a silent plea for understanding, for help. The father sat opposite her, staring blankly at the chipped formica table, his shoulders slumped in a posture of complete defeat. They looked utterly, irrevocably broken. Sarah had seen her share of crying babies in the diner. Most parents, embarrassed by the disruption, offered a quick, strained apology, a forced smile, and then hurried out, leaving behind a trail of spilled crumbs, sticky napkins, and a lingering sense of chaos. But these two, they weren't just annoyed. They looked like they were on the verge of collapse. And the baby's cry wasn't just fussiness. It sounded like pure, unadulterated agony, a desperate plea for relief. A flicker of something stirred within Sarah, a familiar warmth that always seemed to override her own bone-deep weariness. It was the same feeling that made her slip an extra biscuit onto a hungry trucker's plate, or spend an extra minute chatting with old Mrs. Henderson about her prize-winning hydrangeas, even when Pop was glaring at her from behind the counter. It was empathy, pure and unadulterated, a luxury she often felt she couldn't afford in her own struggle, but one she could never quite suppress. It was a core part of who she was, a quiet strength that often went unnoticed. She delivered the coffee to table 3, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere, her eyes still drawn, almost magnetically, to booth 7. The mother was now openly weeping, silent tears, tracking clean paths through the flour dust that seemed to cling to her cheeks. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. The father finally stirred, a flicker of life in his blank eyes, reaching out a hesitant hand to touch his wife's arm, but she flinched away, her despair too raw to be comforted. The baby's cries were now punctuated by choked gasps, little desperate gulps for air. It was clearly in profound distress, its tiny body arching. Sarah knew the rules. Don't interfere. Don't get involved. Pop, the diner owner, was a stickler for efficiency, for keeping the customer flow moving, for minimizing any kind of drama. Keep the plates moving, Sarah. Not the tears. He'd grumbled just last week when she'd spent too long listening to a lonely elderly man recount his life story. This ain't a therapy session, it's a diner. But something about this scene, this raw display of parental helplessness, gnawed at her. She imagined herself in that booth, desperate and alone, with a child she couldn't comfort, a child in pain. The thought was unbearable, a chilling echo of her own vulnerabilities. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Sarah made a decision that felt both reckless and utterly necessary. It was a gut feeling, a moral imperative that transcended the diner's rules, her own exhaustion, and the fear of Pop's disapproval. She walked over to booth 7, not with her order pad, not with a forced smile, but with a gentle, almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. Her face was soft, open, devoid of judgment. "Everything all right here?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, a quiet balm cutting through the din of the diner, a stark contrast to the baby's piercing cries. The mother looked up, startled, her eyes wide and bloodshot, like raw wounds. He won't stop," she whispered, her voice cracking, barely a sound. "We've tried everything. Bottles, rocking, changing. He's been like this for hours, since before dawn." She gestured vaguely at the half-eaten food on the table, a testament to their failed attempt at a quick meal. The father finally spoke, his voice hoarse, as if unused. "We're on our way to the hospital," he explained, his gaze fixed on the baby. "He has a fever, a high one. We thought a quick bite might help, but he's just getting worse. We don't know what to do." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. A fever. That explained the desperate cries, the thrashing, the utter exhaustion radiating from the parents. Sarah's heart clenched, a familiar ache of empathy. She remembered her younger sister years ago, burning up with the flu, the helpless fear in her own mother's eyes, the way her mother had paced the floor, wringing her hands. This wasn't just a fussy baby. This was a sick child, and two parents at their absolute wits' end, pushed to the brink of emotional and physical collapse. "May I?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle, extending her hands towards the car seat. It was an audacious request, she knew. A waitress touching a customer's child? It was unheard of, a breach of professional boundaries. But the mother, too exhausted, too desperate to object, merely nodded, her eyes still streaming tears. A silent plea for someone, anyone, to help. Sarah unbuckled the baby from the car seat with practiced ease. She had no children of her own, but she'd helped raise her younger siblings, and there was a certain instinct that kicked in when she held a small, vulnerable life. The baby was surprisingly heavy, a solid, hot weight in her arms. His skin felt like a furnace against hers. She cradled him against her shoulder, gently bouncing, humming a low, wordless tune, a soft, soothing sound that seemed to emanate from her very core. She walked slowly, methodically, around the small space between the booths, her steps soft, rhythmic, a gentle sway that mimicked the rocking of a cradle. She didn't look at anyone, her focus entirely on the small, suffering creature in her arms. The crying didn't stop immediately. It was a gradual fading, a slow surrender. The baby's wails softened to whimpers, then to ragged breaths, then to soft sighs. She felt the tiny body shudder against her, then relax, a profound release. She continued to hum, a lullaby her own mother used to sing. A simple melody that spoke of comfort and safety, of a world where everything would be all right. She walked past the counter, past Pop, who glanced up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a momentary pause in his perpetual scowl, but said nothing. She walked past the other customers, some staring openly, some pretending not to notice, their gazes lingering. She didn't care. All that mattered was the small, hot bundle in her arms, the slowing of his frantic breathing, the gradual easing of his distress. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, suspended in the quiet hum of the diner. The clatter of plates seemed to soften, the murmur of conversations less jarring. And then, slowly, miraculously, the wails subsided completely. The gasps quieted. A small, shaky breath. Another. The baby's body went limp against her, his tiny chest rising and falling evenly. He was still. He was asleep. A profound peace settled over his small, flushed face. Sarah stood there for a long moment, holding him, feeling the warmth of his small head against her neck, the soft brush of his baby-fine hair. She looked down at his face, still blotchy red, but now utterly peaceful, a picture of innocent slumber. A tiny hand, no bigger than a walnut, uncurled from a tight fist and rested against her uniform. A trusting, vulnerable gesture. She walked back to booth 7. The parents were staring at her, their faces a mixture of awe, profound relief, and a dawning hope. The mother reached out, her hand trembling, and gently, almost reverently, took the baby from Sarah's arms. She held him close, tears now freely flowing. But these were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming relief. How did you do that? She whispered, her voice thick with emotion, a raw wonder in her tone. We've been trying for hours. Sarah shrugged, a small tired smile touching her lips, a genuine warmth spreading through her. Sometimes they just need to know someone's there, she said simply, her voice soft. He's got a fever. You should really get him to a doctor, immediately. The father, who had been silent until now, his eyes fixed on his sleeping son, finally stirred. He reached into his wallet, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. It was a significant amount, clearly not given lightly. Please, he said, his voice husky with emotion. This isn't enough, not nearly enough, but please, take it. You have no idea what you just did for us. You saved us. Sarah hesitated. $100. That was more than her entire day's tips, probably more than she'd make in 2 days. It could cover her rent for a week, buy a substantial amount of groceries, maybe even put a dent in her overdue utility bill, a constant source of stress. The temptation was immense, a shimmering mirage in her desert of debt, a fleeting promise of relief. Her fingers twitched, almost reaching for the bill. But then she looked at the sleeping baby, so vulnerable and innocent, at the exhausted, grateful faces of his parents, their eyes still red-rimmed, but now filled with a fragile hope. This wasn't about money. This was about a moment of pure, desperate human connection, a bond forged in shared vulnerability. No, she said, gently but firmly pushing his hand back, her resolve unwavering. Keep it. Just get him to the hospital. That's all the thanks I need. The parents exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them, a profound understanding. The father nodded slowly, a deep respect in his eyes, then reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb. It was a robin, Its tiny wings spread as if in mid-flight, its miniature eyes painted with remarkable detail, a testament to exquisite craftsmanship. It looked ancient, worn smooth by countless touches. "This," he said, his voice softer, imbued with a quiet reverence, "is from my grandmother. It's a good luck charm, passed down through generations. It's brought our family through many hard times. Please take it, as a reminder, as a token of our eternal gratitude." Sarah took the small bird. It was worn from his hand, smooth and cool against her palm. The wood worn soft with age. It felt strangely significant, a tangible piece of a moment she knew she would never forget, a silent promise. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched, her voice thick with emotion. "I will treasure it. We won't forget this," the mother added, her voice stronger now, a hint of steel beneath the exhaustion, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We truly won't. You have no idea." They gathered their things, the father carefully carrying the now sleeping baby, his precious cargo, the mother clutching her purse, her shoulders visibly lighter. They left the diner, a quiet, almost reverent departure, a stark contrast to their frantic arrival. Sarah watched them go, the small wooden robin clutched tightly in her hand. She felt a strange mix of relief and a lingering curiosity. Who were they? Where were they going? What would happen to that tiny, fragile life, that little boy she had held? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, a small persistent echo in her mind. She put the robin carefully into her apron pocket, a tiny, silent witness to the raw vulnerability she had just encountered, a secret kept close to her heart. Then with a sigh she turned back to the tables, to the clatter and the hum, to the endless, unchanging cycle of coffee and toast. The moment was over, but the memory and the small wooden bird remained, a quiet, profound presence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The diner remained the same, a constant in a world that felt increasingly unpredictable, a familiar anchor in Sarah's tumultuous life. The seasons changed, the holidays came and went, but Sarah's routine remained stubbornly, depressingly the same. Her feet still ached, her dreams still felt impossibly distant, shimmering just out of reach like heat hazes on a summer road. She often thought about the couple and their baby. Had he recovered? Were they okay? Had they found the peace they so desperately sought? The wooden robin stayed in her apron pocket, a smooth, comforting weight she would occasionally touch, a silent reminder of that desperate Tuesday morning. Sometimes, in a quiet moment between orders, she would take it out, turning it over in her fingers, tracing the delicate lines of its wings, a small connection to a profound, fleeting encounter. It was a tangible link to an intense moment, a moment that had felt profoundly important, but whose significance remained a mystery, an unresolved chord in the symphony of her life. She never saw them again, not in the diner, not on the street, not anywhere in the small familiar town. It was as if they had simply vanished, leaving behind only the memory of a crying baby and a small wooden bird. Life, in its relentless march, continued to demand her attention, to grind her down. Bills piled up, the landlord called with increasing frequency. The old car needed yet another expensive repair that she couldn't afford. The small act of kindness, while personally fulfilling, did nothing to alleviate the grinding pressure of her daily existence. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, when the diner's noise had finally faded from her ears, she would wonder if she had been foolish to refuse the $100. That money could have made such a difference, even a temporary one. But then she would remember the look on the mother's face, the desperate gratitude, the profound relief, and the quiet sense of rightness would settle over her. It had been the right thing to do, money or no money. Some things she knew were worth more than currency. 10 years, a decade. The number felt immense, A vast expanse of time that had swallowed countless moments, countless faces, countless hopes. Sarah was now 38. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, had begun to show stubborn streaks of silver at the temples, a testament to the passage of time and the weight of her worries. The lines around her eyes were deeper, etched by years of early mornings, late nights, and the constant strain of trying to make ends meet. Pop's diner had been renovated, given a modern sterile facelift that stripped away some of its worn charm, replacing it with sleek chrome and uncomfortable plastic booths. But the work was still the same. The tips were still meager, the bills still relentless. She was still Sarah, the waitress, still struggling, still carrying the weight of unfulfilled dreams, still haunted by the ghost of the artist she once wanted to be. The wooden robin, now a little worn, its delicate colors faded from countless touches, still resided in her apron pocket, a forgotten relic of a distant past, a silent companion in her unchanging life. One sweltering July afternoon, the air in the diner thick with oppressive humidity and the cloying smell of fried onions, a sleek black car pulled up outside. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on this street. A silent, powerful machine that hummed with an expensive grace, its dark windows reflecting the harsh summer light. Sarah, wiping down a sticky counter with a practiced, weary motion, barely noticed it. Rich people didn't eat at Pop's. They drove past, their lives a distant, glittering world she could only glimpse. The car door opened with a soft thud, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to defy the oppressive heat. A dark, expensive fabric that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. His hair was streaked with distinguished silver at the temples, his face lined, but his eyes held a familiar intensity, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through the diner's glue. He looked around the diner, his gaze sweeping slowly, methodically over the booths, the counter, the worn linoleum, his expression one of deep contemplation, as if searching for something, or someone. Sarah felt a strange prickle of recognition, a faint, unsettling echo from a forgotten dream, a sense of déjà vu that she couldn't quite place. She shook her head, dismissing it. No, impossible. She'd never seen this man before. He was too polished, too out of place. He belonged in a different world, a world of boardrooms and art galleries, not a greasy spoon diner. He walked directly to the counter, his steps deliberate, unhurried, his gaze finally settling on Sarah. Her rag paused mid-wipe, frozen in place. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, held a depth that made her feel oddly exposed, as if he could see straight into her soul, into the hidden corners of her forgotten dreams. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and resonant, a voice accustomed to being heard, to commanding attention. "Are you Sarah?" Sarah blinked, startled by the directness of his question, by the unexpected familiarity of her name on his lips. "Yes," she said, her voice a little unsteady, a tremor she couldn't control. "Can I help you?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a smile that seemed to carry a hint of sadness, a touch of profound memory, a quiet understanding. "I believe you can," he said, his gaze unwavering, holding hers. "My name is Arthur, and I believe we met once a long time ago, in this very diner." Sarah frowned, searching her memory, racking her brain. Arthur? The name meant nothing. A blank space in her mental Rolodex of thousands of customers. She served hundreds of people a week, thousands over the years. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trailing off. "I don't think so." 10 years ago," he interrupted, his gaze unwavering, his voice firm, cutting through her protest. "You saved my son." The words hit her like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp impact that stole her breath. 10 years. Her son Dot, the crying baby, the fever, the desperate parents, the wooden robin. It all flooded back, a torrent of forgotten details, a rush of emotion that made her breath catch in her throat, her heart pound against her ribs. The image of the tiny hot body in her arms, the exhausted faces of the parents, the smooth field of the carved bird, it all returned with startling clarity. This was the father. Older, yes, his face more lined, his hair more silver, but unmistakably him. The same intense blue eyes, the same quiet strength, the same profound gratitude now etched deeper into his features. You're him, she whispered, her voice barely audible, a raw whisper of disbelief and dawning understanding. The baby, is he? Arthur's smile widened, a genuine warmth spreading across his face, a profound relief in his eyes. Leo is a healthy, thriving 10-year-old boy, he said, his voice filled with a father's boundless pride, a deep, resonant joy. He's brilliant, mischievous, and he asks about you constantly. He's a whirlwind of energy, a truly incredible child. Sarah felt a wave of dizzying relief, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. He was okay. All these years she had wondered, had worried, had carried that small, unanswered question in her heart. He asks about me, she managed, her eyes welling up with tears she couldn't hold back, tears of profound gratitude and unexpected joy. Every year, on his birthday, Arthur confirmed, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He remembers very little of that day, of course, a blur of discomfort and fear. But his mother and I have told him the story countless times. Of the kind waitress who saved him when we were at our lowest point, when we felt utterly alone and helpless. He paused, his gaze softening, a deep emotion in his eyes. We never forgot you, Sarah. Not for a single day. You became a legend in our family. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, thick and painful. She had truly believed they had forgotten, that her small act of kindness had been swallowed by the vast indifference of the world. Just another fleeting interaction in a busy diner. The idea that she had been remembered, cherished even for a decade, was almost too much to bear. We tried to find you, Arthur continued, his voice dropping slightly, a hint of frustration in his tone. After Leo recovered, after we knew he was truly out of danger, we came back to this diner. But you weren't here. Pop told us you'd taken a few days off. By the time you returned, we had already left the country. My work took us abroad, for what we thought would be a few months, a temporary relocation. But it turned into years, a decade of living overseas. We searched online, hired investigators, He reached into his inner jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was identical to the one she carried, a robin with its wings spread, its tiny eyes gleaming. It was a perfect match, a mirror image. My grandmother's charm, he said, holding it out, his voice soft with reverence. You still have yours? Sarah, her hand trembling, reached into her apron pocket, her fingers closing around the familiar, smooth shape. She pulled out her own robin. It was worn, its colors faded, its edges softened by countless touches, but it was undeniably the same. She held it out, and the two robins, identical yet separated by a decade of time and experience, met in the space between them, silent witnesses to a shared history, a profound connection. We never stopped looking, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, a raw sincerity in his tone. And then, a few months ago, Leo, who is quite the whiz with computers, a true prodigy, found an old article about Pop's Diner's recent renovation. Your name was mentioned in a small sidebar. A brief quote about the diner's history, a passing reference. It was a long shot, a desperate last attempt. But we followed it. We cross-referenced. He paused, taking a deep breath, his blue eyes locking onto hers, holding her gaze with an unwavering intensity. "Sarah, that day, you didn't just come for a crying baby. You saved our family. We were at a breaking point, Sarah. My wife, Elara, had just been diagnosed with a severe autoimmune disease, and the prognosis was grim. We were drowning in medical bills, struggling to keep our small art gallery afloat, living paycheck to paycheck. Leo was so sick, and we were so utterly exhausted, so desperate, so terrified. We had just received devastating news about Elara's health, and we were trying to make ends meet while dealing with the crushing weight of medical expenses. That $100 we offered you was literally almost all we had left in the world, our last bit of emergency cash. Your refusal, your pure, selfless kindness, it gave us hope. It reminded us that there was still good in the world, still compassion, even when ours felt like it was crumbling around us. It was a lifeline, a beacon in the darkness." Sarah stared at him, tears now freely flowing down her cheeks. A mixture of shock, overwhelming emotion, and profound gratitude washing over her. She had no idea. She had simply seen a family in distress and acted on instinct, a simple human impulse. The idea that her small gesture had resonated so deeply, had provided such profound comfort, had literally saved a family from despair, was almost unfathomable. It was a revelation that shook her to her core. "We made a promise that day," Arthur continued, his voice firm, unwavering, a deep conviction in his tone, "that if we ever found you, we would repay your kindness. Not with money, not with a simple thank you, but with something far more meaningful. Something that would truly change your life as you changed ours." He took another deep breath, his blue eyes still holding hers, a profound sincerity radiating from him. "Sarah, my wife, and I own a chain of art galleries. We started small, struggled for years, faced countless setbacks. But after that day, something shifted within us. Your act of kindness, your selflessness, it reignited our spirit, our determination. We found the strength to keep going, to fight for Elara's health, to build our business, to create something beautiful out of our pain. And now, our gallery..." Sarah's mind reeled, struggling to process the enormity of his words. Art galleries? The dreams she had buried so long ago, the canvases she longed to paint, the vibrant colors she yearned to mix, the textures she longed to explore. They flickered to life in her mind, a kaleidoscope of forgotten aspirations. "We know about your passion for art," Arthur said, as if reading her thoughts, his voice gentle. "We did our research, Sarah, extensive research. We saw your old art school applications, your portfolio from years ago, the sketches you submitted. It's remarkable, Sarah. Truly remarkable. Your talent is undeniable. Your vision unique. It's a tragedy that it was never fully realized." He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a thick, official-looking envelope, crisp and substantial. "We want to offer you a position," he said, his voice gentle but firm, a clear, unwavering offer. "Not as a waitress, Sarah. Your days of serving coffee and toast are over. We want you as the director of our new flagship gallery opening next year in New York City. It comes with a substantial salary, comprehensive benefits, and most importantly, a dedicated studio space where you can pursue your own art with all the resources you could ever need, materials, mentors." Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis, a dizzying sensation that stole her breath. New York City. A studio. It was too much, too sudden, too unreal. Her hands trembled violently as she took the envelope, the paper rustling softly. She opened it, her eyes scanning the official letterhead, the impressive numbers, the detailed offer, the terms and conditions. It wasn't a dream. It was real. Every word, every clause was a tangible promise of a future she had long ago given up on. But why me? She whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion, a raw vulnerability in her question. I'm just a waitress. I haven't painted in years. My skills are rusty, my dreams buried. Because you showed us true humanity when we needed it most, Arthur replied, his voice unwavering, a profound conviction in his tone. Because you chose kindness over personal gain, empathy over self-interest. Because you saw a desperate family and offered a hand. Not a bill, a moment of pure, selfless compassion. That kind of character, Sarah, that depth of empathy and generosity, is rarer and more valuable than any artistic talent, any business acumen. And we believe that someone with your heart, combined with your undeniable talent, will not only make our gallery shine, but will inspire countless. He paused, a profound sincerity in his gaze, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering conviction. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is an investment in a good person, in a beautiful soul, and in the ripple effect of kindness. We want Leo to grow up knowing that the world is full of people like you, that one act of compassion, one moment of selfless giving can change everything. It can change lives, it can build empires, it can heal wounds. You embody that truth, Sarah. And we want to help you paint your own masterpiece, not just on canvas, but in life. Sarah looked down at the wooden robin in her hand, then at the offer letter, then back at Arthur's kind, earnest face, his eyes filled with a quiet certainty. 10 years ago, a crying baby, a desperate family, a small act of selfless compassion performed in a greasy diner. And now, a life-altering opportunity, a chance to reclaim the dreams she had long ago surrendered, to finally step into the life she was meant to live. It was a testament to the unseen threads that connect us, the quiet power of human connection, and the astonishing way that kindness, when truly given, can echo through time and return in the most unexpected, most profound ways. The clatter of plates, the hum of the diner, the smell of fried onions, it all faded into the background, becoming a distant, irrelevant hum. All that remained was the quiet hum of possibility, the vibrant colors of a future she had never dared to imagine, finally, miraculously, within reach.